no light outside because our very presence brings light. So Boker Tov. Thank you. We're bringing in some more chairs, and we delayed a little bit so that the religious school parents can drop off and come on over. We're still in 2 different locations, soon not to be in 2 different locations, which is my unsolicited plug for April 22nd. You're not going to want to miss this meeting, though we have a plan, and we are moving forward and hope that we'll probably have to start Cruza next year, but we won't have to finish Cruza next year. It's a fast-track plan that you'll want to hear about and participate in. So please come April 22nd to the congregational meeting. It's an informational meeting. Thank you, Erin. So come on in and sit down. Hi, come on in. There's room over here. This part of the Jewish calendar for me is very profound and very emotional. Living the rhythm of the Jewish year as we do, all the frenzy around Passover, which then eases into Holocaust Memorial Day, which is a dark cloud that descends on the soul of the Jewish people. As the generations go on, unfortunately lifting a little bit too much. We at BJBE, Rabbi Stoller, making a 3-part series, not just a one-time lecture, but a 3-part series on this topic, is so that we live in that dark cloud and sustain it for a while as our obligation to not only not to forget, but also to understand. And that dark cloud moves into what is happening tomorrow, which is Yom HaZikaron, the Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers in Israel, which is also just that juxtaposition is extraordinarily profound, from Holocaust to the Memorial Day of the young soldiers, which goes without even skipping a beat into Israel Independence Day, and then ultimately to Shavuot, which is our context for hope and light, even in the darkness, the giving of Torah at Sinai. So you're right now in a very powerful, powerful time. We have a relatively new member. I don't know, Dahlia, how long have you been here? Joe?
About 3 years.
Oh, I guess not so new anymore. Dahlia and Joe Tesher have been here for 3 years, and when Joe came onto the scene, he did so with great humility on one hand and enthusiasm on the other for bringing us very interesting personalities. I won't even say speakers, but personalities who live the reality of the Jewish people. And one of the personalities he has brought right now is his friend Isaac. And so I'm going to let Joe introduce Isaac. And unfortunately, I told Isaac I can't stay, but Rabbi Stoller has started to tape our session, so I'll be able to hear it on tape. And I know we had our conversation. So Joe, we're enormously grateful to the attention that you pay to our congregation. And to this gift that we're about to hear right now. Thank you for the kids who either cut class or cut sleeping today. I'm not quite sure what it is you cut, but your presence here is everything. Isaac, we don't have a microphone, so we'll be very, very quiet, and we'll lean in, speak up a teeny little bit, but you're really witnessing an eyewitness. Potentially very, very powerful. Lean in and listen very, very carefully. So Joe, I'll allow you to introduce your friend and take my leave, unfortunately, with other business at the temple, but our gratitude, Rabbi Stoller, and I thank you very much.
So several years ago, I joined a kind of guys luncheon club that meets weekly, various locations on the North Shore. And the distinguishing characteristic of this lunch group is that the conversation is conducted entirely in Hebrew. along with the usual banter about the situation in Israel and politics and medicine and technology, one voice kind of stood out and caught my attention very soon, and that was the voice of our guest lecturer today, Isaac Levendel. On the one side, he is full of kind of a mischievous, boyish kind of humor. Every other sentence is something humorous, but on the other hand, he kind of mesmerized us, telling us about his research into one of the deadliest events, I guess, in human history. Before I met Isaac, I used to think I knew all about the Holocaust, or a lot about the Holocaust. My own family history was unfortunately connected with the Holocaust. My father was a leader of the Jewish community in Berlin, and he was personally interrogated twice by Adolf Eichmann. My wife Dahlia's uncle, Roger Katz, was the deputy commander of the Belgian resistance in World War II. And I had a cousin, Sally, in New York, who used to tell me that she made the, quote, grand tour, starting in Theresienstadt, moving on to Auschwitz, and ending up in Bergen-Belsen, where her sister died, lying next to her. But listening to Isaac over those many luncheons and other presentations like this, and hearing the really unimaginable tragedy and his incredible tenacity in uncovering the truth about what happened that he will tell you, I learned a lesson that I hope will be imparted to you all here. And that lesson is that the Holocaust, or the event we call a Holocaust, is something we can really never know about. We have to, it's incumbent on us to keep learning about it, studying about it, revisiting it, and most importantly, it is incumbent upon us never to forget. I give you Isaac.
I think I will come every Sunday morning to be showered like this by friends and non-friends. Anyway, I want to take you through a kind of set of zigzags which represent my life, and I presume I'm not the only one who has gone through a lot of zigzags, but my zigzags have a particular route which is really the nail in the title of my presentation. My family comes from southeastern Poland, which was alternatively free Russian and Austrian, and that explains a lot of the changes in the naming. And my name comes from the Austrian period. Levendel in German means lavender, because my family were soap makers and they had to choose a non-Hebrew name. My father is here, amongst brothers, and my mother in a music lesson is here. She was around 14 years old and was taking music lessons. I found these pictures actually in a set of photographs abandoned in my house after the war. I just found them in the corner somewhere. She is here in the orchestra, the mandolin orchestra of Przemyśl. And one thing struck me about that picture is that if you didn't know it's 1934, and you didn't know it's in Przemyśl, it could be anywhere today. The way people are dressed is not according to the image we have of the Polish ghetto. Very modern looking people. My mother and father moved to France and they married in 1935. My father moved first, 1930. My mother next, 1935. They knew from before. And this was the case in many marriages in those days. There was a previous acquaintance from Poland. And not long after that, I was born, 1936 in June. My father and my mother dealt with a small business, and my father actually, while my mother was keeping a store in the small village, my father was actually selling on the open marketplace. The south of France, for those of you who have visited, because of the mild climate, allows a lot of open market days, even in winter. So, you know, cities have their day, and people go and sell. And here's my father with the old Talbot, which was bought it was used limousine. I know that because I remember as a kid, I loved to go in, and there was a glass separation between the driver's side and the back. My father volunteered a few times for the war. He volunteered in '39, but they refused him because he was Polish in France, and he was not a citizen. But in 1940, early 1940, the French actually accepted the establishment of a Polish unit under a Polish general, foreigners, but they were actually united and reporting to the French military. So his unit was positioned in the area here, Germany, Switzerland, France, the little star here. And the Germans actually disappointed the French, who were waiting for them deep into the ground, and they surrounded them. My father's unit was cut off from the supply viewpoint, and the Swiss allowed them to come in without arms, without weapons. And here's a photograph of my father in Switzerland working in a detention camp. He stayed there. He tried to flee once or twice. They caught him back, and he came back to France in 1945 at the time of the signature of the armistice with the Germans. So he stayed in Switzerland until then. In the meantime, I want to give you a few events, and I'll go fast over them. Some of you probably know these events. The projector is a little too, there is a piece cut here. Can we make a little difference? Go to the top. Well, it's a problem, right?
Push it forward.
But then you lose the bottom. Okay. I don't know what the...
Here's how to fix that.
Oh, okay, that's a good idea.
Move it closer, it'll get smaller.
Okay. And lower it a bit. Okay. On the 18th of June, 1940, the French capitulate and lose the war. The armistice was signed in Montoire, which is in the center of France, and the agreement provides for a free, and I put free in quotes, I can't do it in speaking, but it provides for a free zone, which is here in the area beige, tan color. The French are sovereign in that area, and sovereign again in quotes, while the Germans occupy the north. Now, as soon as the French take over the south, they edict anti-Jewish laws, which apply to the entire country. So the agreement is that in internal affairs, the French will be sovereign in this area and will actually also legislate in that part. The main piece of law is called the Statute of the Jews, which determines the statute of Jews in French society. And there are a variety of measures which all of them have as a goal eliminating the Jews from the economy. In the Statute of the Jews, there is no specific determination or enunciation of extermination. The idea is to eliminate them from the economy. And the fundamental core is essentially economic part of the law, which determines that no Jew in France can own assets, or have contact with a non-Jewish public. So any job or work that has these two ingredients, that's based on assets and on contact with a non-Jewish population, is eliminated. So you can take any profession you know, pass it through the principle, and you see what remains for the Jews essentially is our professions of secondary nature and in the back of the profession. Now, in on November 11, 1942, the Germans actually went down to the area that was previously French sovereign, and the reason for that is the landing of the Allies in North Africa, which is actually, compared to this picture, is down in this area. And the Allies landed there, the Germans got closer to the sea, and at the same time, the Italians occupied that zone, which is essentially along the river Rhone, R-H-O-N-E, and the city, my city, Avignon, where I lived and was born, that city actually sits on both zones. It's difficult on that map to show it, but in fact, the Germans took over a strip of land on both sides of the river Rhone to be able to control both the river and the road that goes along. So essentially they stepped into the Italian part with battalions and units, so that in that area the Italian zone is not just Italian, it's Italian-German. And basically, when the Italians lost and capitulated in 1943, because the Allies from North Africa went up Sicily and Italy, the Italians at some point capitulated and they left that area. The Germans took over that area, and by then the entire country was occupied by Germany. I wanted to give you the timelines so some of the next events are more understood. Well, these are part of my memories, and the pictures actually, both I found them after the war, but they also correspond to memories I had as a child. We used to have regular photo sessions. You know, which Jewish mother doesn't want to show the picture of the kids? And in my case, that was obvious. And also, well, let me tell you a little bit of a little story. You see the shoes here are dark shoes. That's not exact in my memory. This shoes was supposed to be white as the dress. And while my mother was preparing herself, I decided to do like the grown-ups and to polish my shoes. And that explains that my mother had to change them and put me other shoes on. So this has a kind of personal memory attached to it. These regular photo sessions actually were done to exchange with the family in Poland. We had a very large family. My mother had 7 sisters, 1 brother, and my father had 3 or 4 brothers and sisters. Some of the sisters are not in the picture there. And we used to exchange pictures, so we got pictures of the family in Poland. And I do remember vividly that this lasted until 41, beginning of 42, and then nothing. Now, at the time, my mother was talking about the silence from the Polish side of the family, but we didn't know why. Now we do. While going through the things left in the attic of my house, actually, this is also a finding from after the war. I went upstairs with essentially a ladder going to the attic, and I found in the attic an old agenda. This is an agenda of, it's October, but it's 1937. My mother, for the business, kept an agenda where she would take notes. That's also where I found the various payments for the car, the Talbot, that was paid up before the war. And she gave me that agenda in 1941 approximately, when he was already old and there was no more value to it. And I used it to draw pictures because paper was very rare. And this is one of the pictures that, again, I drew, and I remember that incident that prompted it. We had a convoy of gypsies passing by the main road next to our store. It was very impressed by the cooking system they had often in the back of the car, and they were driving those with horses. There were maybe sometimes two of them attached to each other. These gypsies actually, I learned from my research later, that they were taken to an area maybe 100 kilometers from my place, and there was a gathering camp for the gypsies. Their fate was supposed to be that of Jews as well, except they got to them late and they did not get deported, contrary to other gypsies in other countries. In Belgium, for instance, gypsies were deported from Malines, but from France they didn't get to them yet, so they just collected them in a camp in Ardèche, France. In early June, and I don't know exactly the date. Well, I know the date of her arrest, but there are dates around that I'm not sure. The arrest is actually the 6th of June, exactly D-Day. That's why I remember it. Now, on that day, she was arrested, and I escaped arrest by pure coincidence. It's a luck. It's one of these situations that you don't plan. We decided in that time frame, and that was 2nd or 3rd of June, my mother decided to go away from the city of Avignon because it became very dangerous and people were being arrested. I remember a conversation between my mother and Mrs. Sokolovsky, a friend of the family, who came on a bike to explain to my mother we need to leave. And my mother couldn't get herself to leave because we lived only on the store, which had very little merchandise, but at least there was something to sell and there was an income. She was hesitant to leave, so remember the war started, was lost on 18th of June 1940. We are almost 4 years later. And during that time, we lived in that same little village next to Avignon. Finally, she decides to go, and we go to a mountain area. The city is called Venasque. For those of you who know, it's near Carpentras. It's a town smaller than Avignon, which is more remote, and Venasque is even more remote in the beginning of the Alp area. It's a pre-Alp mountain. We went to a farm, and for some reason that I don't have too much time to go into it, I decided to stick with a boy. I see him as much older, but I think he was 12, 13 years old, where I was 7.5. He became my hero for a variety of reasons. She said to me, I'm going back to the village to pick up stuff we need. Do you want to come with me? And I said, no, I stay with the boy. That's my first time I decided to stay separate from my mother. And I stayed with the boy. The boy had done a few things that I was absolutely in awe. The farm was managed by two people in their late 60s, Mr. and Mrs. Veve, V-E-V-E. They didn't have children, but they had this boy that was working with them. They kind of got him in, I don't know how. And five Jewish people from one family. Two parents, Mr. and Mrs. Stelzer, and the three daughters. The youngest one was 15, the eldest was 19. And they had been friends of my mother before, and we were going to rejoin them. So I stayed with the boy and them in the farm, and my mother was supposed to come back a day or two later, and she didn't come back. So I convinced the family, the Jewish family, to send me with the youngest girl. We are going to see what happened, and that's when we discovered that something very wrong was happening. The store, our store, was normally closed when nobody was there, and the curtain, the iron curtain, was kind of slightly, well, it was 1 yard high open, and I could go in personally, go in, so there was no locking, and that was kind of worrying. I didn't know what was happening. The girl went to talk to the neighbors. In the meantime, I was kind of in front of empty house. It's a little later that actually the truth came out. While the daughter was talking to her mother and the mother was crying, I was hearing it through the door of the kitchen, and they thought I wouldn't listen, and the sentence actually came out through the door. The daughter was saying to the mother, "There's nothing you can do, the Germans did it." And at the time when you hear that, you know what it is. The next thing, they panicked. The family panicked because they said, in case my mother speaks, they might be caught, so the father decided to scatter us. He took me first to the family breast. And these are photographs of the time. I'm here and here. And this is a boy who is called Michel. He's a little older than me. I learned later he's an adopted child. So the family actually took in kids who were not theirs. I must say, I didn't find them immediately. I went to see them. I tried to find over the years. I tried to see, I was deceiving everybody. I didn't want to talk about it. So when I took my family, my kids and my wife, to this area, I would drive around and I would keep an eye to try to find where the farm was. I didn't see it until 92. So much later, in 92, suddenly I drive in the side road and I see a scene that I recognize from my school days then. It was a castle and some trees, and I stopped them. And I said, I must find the family breast. I finally found them. It took a little while. I found them for a neighbor. And the neighbor, when I came in, I said, well, I used to be a kid in the Breast family. Oh, he said, and you see his face kind of contemptuous. And he said, yeah, these people were on welfare and yet they would take children out of their home. See, I understood then that there was something in the Breast family that made them outsiders. They were not one of us from the point of view of the village. These people actually had decided that I had a gift, and I'll explain that. The eldest son, Fernand, was a dowser. I see some heads nodding, which means that some know what a dowser is, and then I see puzzlement, which means that some people don't know what a dowser is. Well, you take a tree fork, and it has to be a flexible tree, and you walk around. And when you get over a source of water, the tip of the fork needs to go down. And he would demonstrate to everybody that in the yard there was water. So he goes with that thing, and oops, here. And the family actually backed him up. Nobody had drilled down to find really if he was right, but he had this gift and everybody knew it. Now he decided that I have the gift too. So how is he going to show that he is right? He said, he took the family in, there were several kids, the parents, he took them inside the living room and he said, you go out and wait until I call you. I go out, then he calls me in, he says, you're going to find it. I said, what? He said, you know where you find it. And he gives me a pendulum. And the pendulum, he says, is going to rotate, you know, circular rotation when you get over it. So I take the pendulum, and believe me, I've never seen a pendulum that's more dead than the one I'm holding. This pendulum is not moving. So I am walking in the room, and nothing happens. So I am now conscious. You see, when you are in front of a public, you are conscious that, you know, if nothing happens, right? So, but I watch on with my eyes. I have a peripheral vision, as I was telling to my friend. I have good peripheral vision, and I see that Fernand's body is behaving differently depending where I go. If I go here, Fernand is doing that. If I go there, I see Fernand waking up. So guess what? I go in the direction that makes Fernand more active. And I am going straight at the kind of area. It's pretty big, so I go, and I don't know where I'm going. But when I pass over a shoebox, he jumps. He says, I told you. He found it. So I stop, of course. And he had hidden the pipe of Dad in the box. So that was a proof that I have the fluid, he said. And when I met the family in '92, I found them. They said, can you still do it? Anyway, so you guessed the answer, right? Anyway. My father came back in 1945 at the signature of the armistice with the Germans, and took me back. And in '46, I was already in school. Here, you can see when he came back, he was a crushed man. I didn't realize that until I looked at the pictures later and compared this with that. And I wanted to take you through a zigzag, or many zigzags, maybe to, instead of going back to the period, I'm going to go forward and show you how a event like the one happened to me can impact what you do later. It's very loaded, but I'm going to go over pieces separately so you don't have. But I marked in different colors, and I'll explain the colors. The white on top here is, I'm still in Avignon area, and I'm going through high school and learning math. I was good at math, so I went into the math and the mechanical engineering, mining and metallurgy engineering in the east of France. And then this is the Israeli period. So for some reason there is a break here. And after the 6-day war, there is another break, and I go to return to studies. And finally, I am finding myself in the US. So I'll explain a little more of these things. One important event in '54 is a consciousness of mine. I had been drifting as a young guy towards socialism and communism. It was very tempting at the time because it was promising a better world, and who could want a better world than people like me? So very tempting, but then I don't know why, contrary to some other people, I was shocked by what was happening in Soviet Union and in all the satellite countries, and I have a list of things here. Surprisingly, many of my peers were oblivious to that. I remember arguments that I had with communists, Jews and non-Jews, telling them, look, there's anti-Semitism there. By the way, one you may not know very well is the liquidation of the anti-fascist committee. This anti-fascist committee was Jewish set during the war, and it provided knowledge to countries in the West through Switzerland. So the French people in the south of France had the knowledge about what was happening in Eastern Europe, and they were trying to disseminate it for the Jews. This committee was liquidated by Stalin because of the fear that they would be too nationalistic, of course. And the same things happened to a variety of cases, which I listed here, and that deterred me completely of going back, going further into the communist socialist domain. But I had not left the idea of collective mutual agreements between people. So that is why in '57 I decided to immigrate to Israel. That was coming after a discovery. I discovered the left Zionist groups, Hashomer Hatzair in particular, and I was excited by the fact that finally I could exercise the need to a collective agreement, but not under the force of a guy like Stalin or others who were actually popping all over the countries behind the Iron Curtain. And I drop out of my original profession and then starts a series of zigzags, but not completely, they are in line. Imagine a guy, young guy, who spent some years in the war and felt a sense of defeat without being able to do anything about it. The first thing I did was joining the paratroopers, because in my mind, being a fighter was a solution to a variety of problems. I didn't do it at the time with the total consciousness that I have today, but if I look back, that was my determining factor. After that, I took a job here, the second one. Aliyat HaNoar was organizing young children from inner cities, and most of these children were actually in trouble. There was children in distress for family reasons, a variety of family reasons. One example is a girl, she was 12 and a half, and her mother was a prostitute. The father was an alcoholist living at home, and the pimp too, the children also. Just a total disaster, and the girl decided to flee the home. She took a little suitcase and went to a judge, a youth judge who was taking care of the family, and he called me and says, would you want to take her into your group? So I said, yes, of course. So that's an example of a child in distress. Again, if I look back, my desire to help children in distress was coming from far back. I just felt for their situation. At some point, I was offered the job to organize Jewish immigration from Morocco. It was a covert operation, or semi-covert, and I spent 2 years in Morocco. I lived in Casablanca and had an operation that spanned different towns in Morocco. My associates were local, so they were actually controlling different things, and we had safe houses where we would meet young people, etc. I spent the time there again, and the reason I remember the dialogue I had with the people who offered me the job was, they said, the Jews in Morocco are in danger. See, so again, the connection with my past. They are in danger, and we need to take them out, because if the king, who is relatively friendly, collapses, they'll be the first victims. And the example that was given was the earthquake of Agadir. Some of you may have heard there was an earthquake in the early 60s in Agadir, late 50s. And during the earthquake, the civil government lost control, and looters actually went to the town and looted everybody they could. The Jews were the first victims. They were easy targets, basically. So all of that convinced me that this is a task I need to undertake. So you see again another zigzag or another zig or zag linked to a long lost path. In '67, Six-Day War, and I was shot at by friendly fire. I do remember somebody mistook me for an infiltrator from Gaza. We were positioned next to the Gaza border, and he had, actually it was in the middle of the night, and he had no glasses on. He took his glasses off, didn't find them, and saw a silhouette moving. He thought I am an infiltrator, and he started shooting. Fortunately, he missed me, so I could give you a talk today. Anyway, and that also shook me, and at some point I said maybe it's time for me to take care of some other things that I had left, which is studying, and at that time I couldn't stop. This is really interesting because you hold it, and then at some point it has to go, and I couldn't stop studying, so I went up to a PhD, again because I had been drilled in my mind for many years that education is a thing that's very important. Education is almost like a violin. When you flee, you can take it with you, not a piano. You see, in my father's mind, things you can take with you when you flee are essential, and therefore education is first. It's before the violin because you don't need a box to carry it. So I went back, and I worked at the Weizmann Institute, as you can see, and did many things because I needed to catch up. By then, I was not anymore the youngster, so I did multitasking plus children, family, etc. And at some point, my advisor at Weizmann Institute didn't like my proposal for PhD, so I said, okay, the hell with you. And I found another person who was excited by my project. It happened to be in California. So we went to California. There was something interesting here, because when I was doing that job, they taught me how to be clandestine. It's not that simple. I mean, their teaching is good. The student is not that great. So when I arrived to Morocco, I remember I arrived to Morocco and I had rushed in my preparation. So I was trying to, they said, you must be very, very well dressed and kept. So I polished my shoes just before the airport. I go to the airport, I pass everything, I come to my hotel in Casablanca, open the suitcase, and what do I find? A shoe polish box with Hebrew notes on it, and the brush with the, again, I don't remember the name of the brush, but it was written in Hebrew. It was on the top of my suitcase, because I was rushing, I put everything in the suitcase and I left instead of leaving it in Paris. So, you see, the teaching didn't stick completely, but I perfected it over the 2 years, and I decided I'm going to go to hunt Nazis. That was my decision. And evidently, my plan didn't go through because I met my future wife, and 3 years later we had a child, and that was not compatible with what I had in mind. In fact, it set me another zig or zag, but then there was more of a straight line for a while. I don't think I can stay on a straight line. Okay, in 1992, after a lot of things in the straight line, I mentioned already, I went back to this past. That was the first time, really, that I really decided to talk about it a little bit to my family. My family had no knowledge of significance about it. And in '92, I decided to look for answers. And one of the things that I wanted to actually do in 1992 was essentially take all the pieces of memories that I had and put them together. I assume that all have been thinking about past memories, and as I still have very fragmental past memory, very early, but still fragments. I remember the strip, the sticky strip hanging in our kitchen to catch flies. Yeah, I see some of you nod. That testifies on your age. In fact, they used to have these strips hanging, and you can see the flies moving the wings, and it was very strange for a kid. And I remember that, but I don't remember the color of the wall. You see, so this is that image of the thing hanging in the kitchen, and this is true for a variety of other memories, more significant than the fly paper. So I decided to assemble my memory and find out who did it. I didn't know who did it. Arrest my mother. I finally found it. I'm getting fast forward because I don't have enough time, but this is the key item. This is a document that I obtained from a guy that I befriended in Marseille. Why in Marseille? Because I found a neighbor of ours in the telephone book, and I talked to him in '93. In '93, I called the guy, and I introduced myself. I said, "Oh my God." I said, do you know anything about the arrest of my mother? He said, "Yes." In fact, he said, the arrest happened in my kitchen. He was 18 at the time, and my mother and I, we were in the kitchen, and suddenly your mother runs out of her own house, which was just next, across the street, and after her, there were two people that trying to catch her. She had decided to flee, and she fled into their kitchen. They rejoined her, and he said they were speaking French with a Marseille accent. In those days, because of the stagnation of people, they didn't move much. They could distinguish the accent 60 kilometers or 100 kilometers away. We were kind of 70, 80 kilometers from Marseille. The guy said they're speaking French with the accent of Marseille. So I must go to the archives of Marseille and try to find out. I befriended a head of the contemporary archives, and he said, I'll try my best to find out. 3 months later, he calls me in Chicago, and he said, "You must come, I found something for you." And we came to Marseille, and he was so scared because at the time the French didn't want to share anything about the archives. We met outside the archives in a coffee shop, outside on the outside terrace. And he took me as far as possible from the light, so we were under a tree. The lights were there and we could barely see. He pulls out this sheet from his briefcase, and he's holding it, and he says, "Here it is." I try to pull it from him. He doesn't let go. He says, "I let you read it. You'll have to ask for it officially, and I will recommend to release it to you." So I read that document first time under that tree, and the key element is essentially is a witness, Mr. Ben Yakar, Moïse Ben Yakar, or Moshe in Hebrew. He testifies here. Basically, he names my mother with a spelling error. 7 people were arrested the same day on the 6th of June. And on top, Charles Palmieri, he says, "I do not contest having performed his arrest with Bill Arts." He names a German guy. But he also says in a different part that the German guy left. And when he left, Charles Palmieri was the guy who was in charge. Now, that in a sense, that testimony and this finding, well, closed one issue, which is in my first book, which is who arrested my mother. And my first book has more than that, because until I got to this Palmieri, I did another set of explorations everywhere and found information that was shocking about the collaboration of the French. But then I decided that I will want to know more about Palmieri and what type of person that Palmieri is. Why did he do it? And who was with him, in fact, and what else did they do. So the second work is really taking a little bit distance of my own story and trying to understand what's behind it. I will give you briefly the key players in that area. Well, the guy in the yellow circle is the head of the German police in Marseille. So they control the entire area. I'll show you in a minute the area. The other people are personality. Well, this is the chief of the French police, the head of the French police, with the big smile and the nice coat, René Bousquet. And other people which I know a little bit more, but they are somewhat peripheral to the story. The chief of the police in Marseille controls the whole area in yellow, plus this particular segment here. And my town is here. Okay? He controls all of that, and his steady staff is 120 people. 120 for the entire area. It's a staff that's negligible. My whole area here, Vaucluse, there were 10 individuals, including driver and secretary. So officially, the people who were active in any action were 8, and they were busy with all kinds of issues, not just Jews, remember that. They had feel from the resistance, they were fighting black market. The German police had a full plate of issues. Things didn't go very well in France, and Berlin sent a key player. You may have heard about him. This guy, Alois Brunner, was sent in July 1943 to accelerate the process. But the poor guy, I mean, I say poor guy in quotes, he had a small staff, 7 or 8 people maximum. So he too was controlling the entire French territory. He wanted to accelerate the process, and he had only a small staff. I just drew a graph that you might appreciate to some extent. This is the pace of daily average arrest, the yellow here. It's in the 0.25 or 0.2 people per day average in my area. And at some point, Alois Brunner went into the picture in my area. But look at this. This is March 1st, 1944. He arrived in France in July 1943. So you could ask, well, what did he do in between? Well, he actually did round robin. He went from area to area. His first area of action was Nice, the area of Nice, which is on the southern coast. Then he went to Grenoble and Chambéry, which is in the middle of the Alps. And then he dealt with a Paris area. He had a lot of tasks, and he did round robin, so he got to us really in that time frame, and you can see the jump in the average arrest per day. In fact, I also drew, if he had wanted to do what Berlin wanted, which is to exterminate all of us in that area, this is the rate he would have had to go. Steady. Of course, it doesn't go steady, but this is the average. And look how far he was from the goal of Berlin. So it's true that Berlin wanted us all into the gas chambers. But on the ground, it didn't work exactly as planned. I'll show you the next player, and this is the guy who actually arrested my mother. The boss of a gang of Marseille, Charles Palmieri. This guy had been in the business, not arresting Jews, the business of gangsters. He had been from the early 20s, 23, 24. And so he was already implanted in Marseille area with his gang, and he had extensions everywhere. I'll show you the family, the Palmieri family. You'll see faces. He had 2 brothers. Actually, 3 of them were working together. There was a family business, a true family business. His main assistant was his brother Alfred. Victor was sickly, so he was doing office work, basically. He didn't participate actively in the action. But the other guys are people who were in his gang, but this is not the whole gang. I have 4 pages of these. So here's a set of people that you would not want as your neighbors, I suppose. Their faces tell you a little bit what they are after. Each one of them has stories, by the way, and I will go only about a few. Oh, this guy is interesting because although he reported to the guy in Marseille, this guy was planted in the outside market in Avignon. So the guy, Palmieri, had connections to various places by planting people of his or recruiting people locally. Okay, so that's the last one. I wanted to show you the wife of Palmieri here, Jacqueline Palmieri. Her last name was Payer before she married Palmieri. But just to tell you who she was, she married the guy in 41, and in 44 she introduced her lover. This guy, nice guy. She introduced her lover to her husband as an interpreter because he was from Eastern France and knew how to speak French and German. So you have the perfect triangle here, and she's shameless, of course, and he worked for the boss until almost the end, when the boss suspected there was something not quite kosher between him and his wife. At some point, the wife actually took distance from Palmieri because I think he had the easy trigger. Actually, Palmieri was described by his secretary, and the secretary said that Palmieri always had a machine gun hanging next to where he was sitting, and revolvers in the pockets. So this is a guy who was actually expert at violence. I just want to tell you a short anecdote on Quinson. Quinson, just to get you an idea of the person, Quinson was an acolyte, of course, of Palmieri, and Quinson decided to go and do a raid on a farmer in the area who was known to have stashed 300,000 francs. The rumor was circulating, so Quinson with 2 guys went to steal the money. Non-Jewish guys. It's just money. And they were recognized, and the judge actually issued the warrant for his arrest. A week later, Mr. Quinson and the acolyte come to the judge's chamber in Carpentras. They showed to the guard a badge from the German police. They had been hired, and he wants to talk to the judge, so they let him in. And when they came to the judge's office, they put the gun to the head of the judge, and they said, "We ask you to rescind the warrant for our arrest." And guess what the judge did? He executed instead of being executed. These were people who had actually no blockage. This is the place also where I want to mention. The Germans who gave him the badge knew who these people were. In fact, I have documents that prove that this decision to employ this kind of people was taken at least in the command in Paris, the command of the police, German police in all France. I know that because the head of the police of Marseille, to defend himself, said, well, we had, at some point he says, I arrested Palmieri because Palmieri was going overboard on things he was not supposed to do, and the top chiefs actually told me to free him. So the decision to employ this kind of people to do all kinds of jobs. Palmieri, when the Germans wanted blankets in Marseille, do you know what Palmieri does? He goes to Toulon which is is 200 kilometers from Marseille, or a little less. He goes there, he steals blankets from the Germans and brings them to the other Germans in Marseille. He had actually a wholesale fake business where he